everyone, and welcome back to Inspiring Movement, the Jim's Gym podcast. Today we are joined by a very special guest. A lot of you will already know him. He is our Jim's Gym resident registered dietitian, Ian Thomas. He speaks every month at Jim's Gym to the community in the Healthy Habits Club, the fourth Thursday of every month. Very, very, very knowledgeable chap around nutrition. Today we've covered tons of stuff, to be honest. We've talked food, obviously, nutrition, healthy aging, weight loss, massive topic today. And he's covered a bit of myth busting as well as giving you some actionable advice and tips around dieting, diets, nutrition, etc. It's a brilliant one. It's packed full of information and we're going to jump straight in. I hope you enjoy. Ian, great to have you on the podcast today. We've got a lot to cover as this topic always brings a lot of conversation. And I wish we had all day, but we'll try and compact it into one podcast. Let's start with, tell us a little bit about how you got into or decided to become a dietitian. I think that's an interesting question. And a follow-up one straight in, one that I think gets confused a lot, is the difference between sort of nutritionists and dietitians. It'd be a good starting point, I reckon.
Yeah, great. And thanks for asking me to be along here today, James. So I was studying a chemistry degree. That was my degree when I left school. And it was during that chemistry degree that I got really interested in the human biology side of things. And I guess from a personal level, you know, the power food has to improve our health and our well-being. So I made the decision off the back of that to complete that chemistry degree and then go on to study nutrition and dietetics afterwards. So really it was a combination of that academic drive to do it, but also, I mean, I've got a history of heart disease in the family. I think I was trending to be rather overweight as I was a child. So it was a combination of that personal side of things as well. So I studied to be a dietitian. I chose to be a dietitian rather than a nutritionist, and this is no discredit to nutritionists because there are some fantastic practitioners out there. But as a dietitian, it's a HCP accredited course, so it's the Healthcare Profession Council, which means you have to have a degree to call yourself a dietitian. So it comes with that element of, I guess, clinical rigor, and to work in clinical settings, hospital settings, you tend to need that dietetic qualification.
Fine. And how long did it take you how long were you in university? Was it is it a longer course than usual? Is it 3 years, 5 years? Is it?
It's a 4-year course, and there are some that do it in
the middle.
Yeah. So it's three. It was 3 years academic study and 1 year of clinical placement. Depends which session you go to. So I was down in Guildford at Surrey University. I know there are some that do 3 years where you would have your clinical placement sandwiched between over that summer break period.
Yeah. Okay. So when you say, with the sort of the regulation, I guess you have to be on top of all the latest science research. Is that, the sort of, what's the bar? Is it?
Yeah. No,
you can draw a lot of your own conclusions from science, right? And
you're absolutely right there. And I think we see that playing out a lot, and certainly with, social media, quick form media, people will often reference a study or say this is evidence-based, but without necessarily providing the supporting facts and figures for that. So to be HCPC registered, we're really committing to that high level of academic and clinical rigor. So we get audited every couple of years, where you would show your portfolio of work. So you would actually say, this is the work I've done, this is what I've done, these are the references I've used. So that's really the commitment you're making. And I think even I will sometimes have been tempted and will still get tempted to jump on the latest ideas and go, this sounds great. People are saying they've got fantastic results. But when you actually pause and dig deeper into the science behind it, often the claims that are being made are far more outlandish than the reality. So yeah, you're just making that statement that I will deliver a service which aligns with the best available evidence we have. It might not be the most exciting, it might not be the newest, but it's the most clinically and safety orientated evidence that we have.
And I think there's two kind of points to all of that. One is like, how should people, I think it's really easy and tempting to take top line information from social media. Not a particularly healthy thing to do, I don't think. But I guess first question is like, what's someone's advice? What would you advise someone to do if they self-diagnosed perhaps, saw something on Instagram and then gave it a try? What would be the suggestion to perhaps not to do something instead of that, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would always recommend speaking to your healthcare professional first. So be it a GP, if you're under the care of a dietitian or another healthcare provider, physiotherapist or personal trainer, for example, before you embark on doing something independently. Always run it by a professional first, because I think not only is it a case of, is this particular practice or is this particular, in my case, food or dietary approach actually going to help me, but are there considerations in other areas of my life that I'm not aware of right now? So that could be drug and nutrient interactions, or it could be like from a physical point of view, is this particular movement actually going to worsen and another issue that may happen? So absolutely seek that advice from your healthcare team and your medical team before going it alone.
And I think, and then the other part of that was like you mentioned about like the sort of boring element of it. I think people want either shortcuts or something new or exciting that they can try, or might potentially be the answer. And I suppose if it's safe, then yeah, that's okay. But actually, the point is that we kind of know what's good for us, right, when it comes to diet and nutrition, and what we should be eating. And I think you can get that information really easily from the NHS. And it kind of stacks up, right? For the best part, you know.
Absolutely. I think, 80% of us, I think you could follow a very similar diet and get very similar results. Now, of course, you've got particular scenarios, particular medical needs, where there is a very particular sort of diet to follow. And like I said, absolutely, you would hope that's been picked up already by the medical team, and actually you've had that good solid input from your care team there. And I think a great way of looking at it is, rather than focusing on what makes an individual dietary approach different, if we actually stop and take check of actually what's the similarity between these different dietary approaches, you will often see that they share very common themes, and there's only small differences in each of them, which people then try and sell you on those differences. Whereas if you actually look at what threads them together, eat whole foods, eat plenty of plants, get enough protein, and then there's other lifestyle factors as well, such as sleep and hydration and exercise. That really does do for the majority of people.
Okay. Do we need to factor in any sort of changes within the diet as people do age and get older?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, this can be over construed depending on who you listen to, but I think there's a few key things to bear in mind as we get older. The first one is that our lifestyles do actually tend to change. So we, you might have kids, you have a busy job, you move around less, you've got less access to activity. So actually your energy output does tend to decrease. And certainly as you reach kind of the 4th, 5th, 6th decades of life, if you've not managed to maintain, a regular physical practice, it's quite hard then to build that back up. So you'll probably find that energy intake needs are reduced. There are hormonal changes which accompany aging as well. So particularly from a female perspective, going through menopause, post-menopause, that does bring just a whole host of hormonal changes that we do need to consider. Now, the impact of these hormonal changes probably isn't as large as people believe they would be, but they are enough that you might need to change your approach to nutrition. You might need to change your approach to exercise, so that it then better fits what stage of life you are in. And I think another key element to mention with regards to aging is there's something called anabolic resistance, which tends to set in as we get older. And anabolic resistance is your body has a reduced capacity to build muscle as we get older in response to training and nutrition. So when you're younger, you can pretty much eat what you want to eat. You could do some form of activity and your body will lay down new muscle tissue. As we get older, that process doesn't happen as smoothly. So that's one of the reasons why protein requirements tend to increase with age, is that you have to provide more raw material to build more muscle as you get older.
Okay. Good information. Takes me nicely into the sort of big three: the protein, the carbs, and the fat.
Excellent.
And I think you mentioned, the importance of protein. Go on. In a nutshell, again, it's a pretty...
Yeah, in a nutshell, so protein is composed of amino acids. So they're like the Lego bricks. That's the building blocks of protein. And there's 20 naturally occurring ones. We get them through our diet. 8 of the 20 are essential, which means you have to get them through our diet. The other 12, your body can synthesize through grabbing bits of another one, slice them together, and they can create it. But 8, we need to get through the diet. Protein, it really is the building block of everything. So bone, muscle, skin, hair, our immune system, your digestive system, everything really has that protein component to it. So it really is essential. From a dietary guideline perspective, the recommendation has always been about that 0.8 grams per kilo body weight. Okay. But what we're really starting to see now that is the floor. That's the minimum. Yeah. So that's grams. Yeah. So 0.8 grams per kilo body weight. That is the minimum we should be looking to achieve to just maintain and not go into what's called a nitrogen deficiency or a protein deficiency. What the research is now suggesting is that most of us, especially older adults, probably benefit from 1 to 1.2 grams per kilo body weight protein.
Okay. And sort of, we've spoken a lot about different types of protein, but for the sake of this conversation today, what's most protein-rich foods that people should think about?
Yeah. So if we split this into animal-based and non-animal proteins, your animal proteins are the best source of what's known as a complete source of protein. So a complete source of protein means it has all of the essential amino acids that we need from our diet, and they tend to be easily digestible. So good sources of animal proteins, obviously, meat, fish, eggs, dairy. So they will all give you all of the amino acids that you need. Good source of protein if you do eat animal sources. If we look at the vegetarian sources of protein, so you've got pulses, nuts, legumes, beans. I mean, they're all very similar there. And these sources of protein are generally called incomplete because they don't contain all of the essential amino acids at the correct ratios which we require. So I always encourage people not to get too caught up on this fact though, because actually as long as you're eating a mixed diet, so you have some pulses one meal, you have some nuts the next meal, you might have some grains, you will get all of the essential amino acids you need across the course of the day, just not from any one food source.
Okay. All right. I've got tons more questions about that, but I don't think we're going to have time for it. I will ask one more.
Sure.
When do you think it is, at what point do people think they need to take protein supplements, powder or, drink? Are these things that people should be doing now? Is it everywhere? Is it marketing ploys? What's your sort of stance on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as somebody who I do have a protein powder in my cupboard and I probably take it quite regularly. I think the answer is it depends. And I think going back to your earlier point about who should you be speaking to about these things, I think if anyone starts an answer with it depends, they're probably somebody that you should listen to, as annoying as it is. I think protein powders, protein supplements, there's nothing special about them. They're literally just an additional source of protein in the diet. And if you are somebody who maybe has a lower appetite or who struggles to consume the amount of protein that you believe you need in your diet, then having a protein powder on hand is a perfectly viable option. I do think that in terms of these foods which have been protein fortified, it's probably gone too far in that direction. We don't need everything we eat to be high in protein and actually have extra protein in it. And oftentimes anyway, if you compare one of these high protein products to a regular protein product, the difference actually isn't that great. So I do think a lot of it is marketing.
Okay, so the go-to is try and get them through a natural source in first instance, probably. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you are exercising more, then do you increase it more? You eat more? You consume more proteins? Is that?
Yeah, that's a general rule of thumb, and I guess there's levels to it. So if you are, let's say, clinically well, you don't have excess body fat that you want to lose, and you're just doing some gentle activity, your protein requirements probably are within that kind of 0.8 to 1 gram per kilo body weight. If you're somebody who's exercising to build muscle or from a performance perspective, you probably want to increase your protein intake to that 1.2, so that higher level of a recommendation. Also, if you're somebody who's clinically unwell, and by that I mean maybe you've got a long-term health condition, maybe poorly controlled blood sugars, diabetes, maybe if you're undergoing cancer treatment, something like that. I know we're drifting into clinical territory there, but on the conditions where increasing your protein intake can be beneficial to help you maintain that muscle mass. An increased level kind of close to that 1.2 grams per kilo body weight could be useful. If you are somebody who is looking to lose body fat and is in a calorie deficit, so you're not eating as much energy as your body requires, again, that's a scenario where increasing your protein is useful because it helps preserve that muscle mass. And then if you are somebody who is training to build muscle and you are also in a calorie deficit because you're looking to lose fat at the same time, that's kind of like a double whammy there. So you might want to take your protein levels further in that scenario again.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Good to know. All right. Well, we'll move on to the next one, the macronutrients. We go. So we go carbs, and this is one of my favorites because I love carbs. I like to do like long exercise, if that makes sense. So like running or cycling and stuff that takes a while. So they're kind of like a good friend of mine. However, training people now one-to-one, I could almost say like, I don't know, like 9 out of 10 people think carbs are like the enemy and like we should steer clear of carbs. What were we saying here?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think from a personal note, I've been through the whole gamut of, carbs, friends, foe. Are they needed? Are they not needed? Let's start with this idea that you might hear that carbs are not essential to the diet. And the reason that you might hear that is because your body doesn't actually need carbohydrates to perform, to go around its daily activities. It can create the carbohydrate it needs from other things we're eating, such as your protein and your fat sources. That doesn't mean that living a carb-free life is optimal. For a host of reasons. And I think it's probably just worth clarifying. When we talk about carbohydrates, we can typically split these into two. So you have your complex carbohydrates or your starches. So breads, pastas, pulses, cereals, potatoes. These are starch is a long chain molecule. When you chop that long chain molecule up and when you digest it, you release glucose. Okay, so glucose is probably the most prevalent simple carbohydrate or simple sugar that we have in our diet. So we can broadly classify carbohydrates, starches, sugars. Although the body doesn't necessarily need carbohydrate to operate, they are beneficial from the point of view of they do give us energy. the foods that contain carbohydrates. And again, this is an interesting point. We don't just cut carbs out the diet. If you've got a low carb diet, you cut foods out the diet. So therefore, you're cutting sources of nutrients out of the diet. You're probably cutting fiber out of the diet, because we only really find fiber in carbohydrates as well. So by cutting carbs out of the diet, you're going to be reducing your intake of other nutrients, which has knock-on benefits to other areas of our health, or if you're cutting out the diet, knock-on impacts. But there's also elements of our body, such as our immune system, that will perform better if you have carbohydrate in the diet as well. The other thing to consider is when we think about carbohydrates, and typically when people say, I've cut out carbs from my diet, what they're referencing more often than not are things like pastries and pies and pizzas and those processed carbohydrates, which again often come with high fat. They're of low nutrient density, so they don't come with many vitamins and minerals attached to them. So as a food source, they're not great anyway. And people can often end up throwing the baby out of the bathwater, to use a quaint little phrase. They say, I'm cutting out carbohydrates just to remove those foods, but they also then remove those other food sources which might be beneficial. So I think whilst carbs aren't essential, they should still make a reasonable part of your diet. But go for those options. Ideally, most of the time, go for those options which are lower processed. So potatoes, sweet potatoes, whole grains, fruits, fantastic source of nutrients, and pastas and rices as well.
And so are those, would you consider those complex carbs?
So with the exception of the fruits, I would consider those all complex carbs. Fruits, there will be some fiber, there will be some complex carbohydrates, but they're mostly sugar, but they're very much worth including in the diet for all the other benefits they bring.
Okay, bro. All right, last one, fat.
Yeah. So the last three macronutrients. So yeah, fat probably of all three is the most misunderstood. It's the problem child, isn't it? And again, kind of like the carbohydrates, we can classify fat into families, to groups of fat. And typically the two main families are saturated fat and unsaturated fat. And I don't need to go into what the chemical difference is, but saturated fats are typically found in animal foods. So red meat, butter, dairy, and a saturated fat will tend to go solid at room temperature. Okay, so we know that butter in the fridge, butter in a temperate room, quite hard to spread. Whereas an unsaturated fat, which we tend to get from plant sources, tends to stay liquid at room temperature. Okay. Now, this is an important distinction, because although our inside our bodies it's warmer than room temperature, if you have too much saturated fat as opposed to unsaturated fat, you start to see some of those qualities of the hardening of those saturated fats occur, which is potentially one of the drivers for why they have they can have that negative impact on our health.
They tend to gather around like all the wrong places.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to go off on a slight tangent, but to the point, our cells, all the billions of cells in our body, has a double lipid membrane. Okay, so the outside of your cell is one fat molecule facing out, one fat molecule facing in, all the way around. And what makes our cells work so well is that they are fluid. Okay, they move, they're malleable. If there's too much saturated fat in that double lipid membrane, it can start to make the cell be less malleable. So therefore it can actually move less freely and do the things it needs to do and not as effectively. Which again is another reason why omega-3, which is an unsaturated fat, the more of that you can incorporate into your cells, the better your cells are going to function.
Okay. All right. Okay. So omega-3, are we taking additional sort of capsules and things for that? Do people need to supplement with those types of oils?
Yeah, no, again, you should, ideally, you would get it through your diet. So typically, oily fish would be one of the best sources, or you might get some plant-based sources because the fish get it from somewhere. So they get it from the algae and they get it from in their diet. So you can go direct to source and get your omega-3 from those plant-based sources. But if you are getting it through fish, the typical recommendation is 1 to 2 servings of oily fish a week. So oily fish being salmon, trout, fresh tuna, not tinned, mackerel, can be tinned, sardines. So it's not a huge recommendation. But if you are somebody who doesn't like oily fish, then I would suggest having an omega-3 supplement.
Interesting. I don't eat a lot of fish beyond the kids' fish fingers.
Yes. Yeah. So I would probably say that, omega-3 intake, maybe not optimal.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I might give it some thought. Okay. Well, look. So again, another fantastic bridge in here. So again, a massive. I think this is becoming much more commonly understood. But again, another thing when a lot of people reach out to someone like myself, or they join the gym after Christmas. All of the food. It's right. I need to lose weight, hit the gym, do loads of exercise. And I think that a lot of people are beginning to understand that that's not really, whilst it's nuanced and there is a big element, of exercise plays a massive element in people's general health. Maybe it's not the key driver in actual weight loss though. Should we go into that a little bit? What's your take on sort of nutrition and weight loss or weight management, I think, as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to build on the point you just made there, a visual which always stuck with me is if you went on a treadmill for 15 minutes and you maybe not full out sprinting, but you're going at a good pace, you might burn 100 to 200 calories if you are going at a good pace. And again, depending on your starting body size. If you sit down in front of a pizza and eat pizza for 15 minutes, you can easily consume Yeah, exactly. You 1,000 calories worth of pizza, problem, easy. So it's very much true that if you're looking to lose weight, looking to lose body fat, it is much easier to create the necessary energy deficit through adjustments to your diet than it is to try and increase your energy output through exercise. Now, I think exercise, and again, this is obviously your key area. Exercise can provide a stimulus for weight loss, and it can make sure that if you are losing weight, you're losing the weight you want to lose, i.e. from body fat, not through muscle mass. But in terms of achieving that calorie deficit, changes to the diet are going to be key for that.
And what about, and I think this is something relatively new that I found quite interesting, the idea that we sort of plateau, don't we? We kind of we start a diet, we start exercising, we lose a bit of weight, we sort of plateau. And I think there's research coming out that that's probably a lot to do with our body acclimatizing to, it's very clever at going, right, okay, you're exercising more, you're eating less. We're going to sort of keep you at this nice positioning now. So you have to keep on doing more and more and more. Is this, do you understand what I'm saying then?
No, I do, absolutely. And I guess I think that what you're referencing there is the set point theory. So this idea that your body has a weight range which it looks to maintain. And this has since evolved to the settling point theory, which we'll come on to. But the set point theory suggests that if I weigh 100 kilograms and I drop my body weight to 95, 90 kilograms, actually your body will undergo hormonal changes and neurotransmitter changes to drive me to seek out food to take my body weight back to 100 kilos. And this has been demonstrated in some really, the Ansel Keys starvation study, which showed essentially they took young, healthy men, they fed them minimal for a period of time and they became very emaciated. And then as soon as the study finished and they could eat what they wanted, they ate themselves back up to their original weight ad libitum. And as soon as they reached their original weight, their drivers to eat switched off. So that was, we're talking 60, 70 years ago, that study was carried out. So no, it's very much there. And again, when it's a really nice study to reference or talk about when people talk about, oh, well, I'm not eating enough, therefore I can't lose weight. That's a myth we often hear, isn't it? But you've just got to look at that study. Go, well, those guys weren't eating enough, and they lost weight, and they continued to lose weight. But they were in they were in an environment where they couldn't access food, so they had no choice in the matter. They just lost weight. So yeah, as you lose weight, it becomes progressively harder to continue to lose that weight. Not impossible, but as you lose weight, your diet has to shift, and your exercise has to shift to account for the weight loss you've already achieved. And I guess two key components to cover with regards to that is that your total body weight is probably one of the biggest drivers for how much energy you burn in a day. So if I weigh 100 kilos, my energy requirements for the day might be 2,500 calories. If I weigh 80 kilos, my energy requirements for the day might be 2,200 calories. So just through losing weight, you actually require less energy. So you as you lose weight, it's a really good idea to periodically just check in with the deficit that you're working on to say, actually, am I still in the deficit? Because that's another reason some people might plateau in their weight loss journey is they continue eating the same weight loss diet, and that will reach a point where it becomes ineffective for them. So making further reductions to intake or increasing energy output, they'll need to do that to continue going forward.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Which is, I think a lot of people find that hard to hear, that it's, it's not as straightforward as people think it is. It's really hard. And I think most diets all come to the same thing. It's reducing the amount of energy that we consume, I guess, is pretty much, and trying to find the thing that works for you. I think what I often think about is why is it important to that person to want to lose weight? And I think that it always comes down to body image, which I think is a shame. And, at what point, I guess, one, how do we know what a healthy weight is? Because I think that's probably important. And if we're at a healthy weight, it should be less of a thing that we're thinking about doing. And I think, unfortunately, the world that we live in, social media and stuff, is the expectations on us to always, regardless of age, probably, I'm guessing, much worse for younger people, seeing sort of peers and things on the social media is all looking like you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So what's a healthy weight? Where are we?
Oh yeah, good question, because I think it depends is the honest answer there. And I think on a broad population level, we have BMI that we talk about, so body mass index, which is your weight relative to your height. Yeah, it is. I think I said it captures population level changes quite nicely, and I guess just very broad sweeping brushes of actually healthy populations versus potentially unhealthy populations and where we can put them in that category. But it doesn't consider your own individual history, your body, your muscle mass compared to your fat mass. And yeah, to apply it to any one individual, it is a flawed method. And we have some alternatives, actually, I think, where the research kind of shows that they provide just as good reference value. So looking at your waist circumference as opposed to your height, that's quite a nice simple measure that any one individual can do, just to kind of get a gauge of whether they are carrying more weight around the middle than one would necessarily be healthy. But to say what is an ideal healthy weight for any one individual is actually quite a challenge. And I think it's great to have a goal in mind. And I was actually thinking about this earlier in terms of whether this question or these sort of questions might come up. You need a target, don't you? You need you need a target to work towards. But most of us will kind of, that number sounds good. Pluck it out of the air. I'm going to go for that one. Okay. And you need the motivation to make a change. So for most people, that might be a life event. Like I said, it might be body image. It might be a change in their health status. You need some reason to want to go through this change process. But then you need to be able to maintain that change for a long period of time. And I think people probably underestimate how long it's going to take to actually reach their goal in the first place. So taking an approach which they can maintain and sustain for a long period of time is important. Then I often find that you come up against the issue that short-term diets, let's call them crash diets, actually are more motivational in the long run. They require more effort. They're a bit more exciting. You're maybe jumping onto a trend which your friends are doing. That can feel more motivating to follow a short-term approach, but inevitably in 3 to 4 weeks, the motivation drops, and actually then you're stuck and you go back to where you were. There's a trade-off between being motivated, having the motivation to get going with it, but then also taking an approach which you can stick to for a period of time. And then there's also knowing what do you do when you start to reach your goal. Again, I'm going to use my 100 kilo example again, if I weigh 100 kilos and I go, actually, I want to reach 90 kilos. Okay, great, fine, okay. I get, I'm doing really well. I get to 92, 93 kilos and I start to think, but I'm not looking how I thought I would look at this stage. I'm not feeling how I thought I would feel at this stage. So now I'm going to try and shoot for lower. And I guess that's the potential trap that people fall into, is that they start to get towards their goal. I must go lower. And at some point you've got to be okay with, no, I'm going to hover here. And I might go up a bit, I might go down a bit, but my new mission now is to maintain. That's a completely different skill set. Weight loss is one skill set, maintenance is another skill set.
Because I was going to say that, you mentioned the setting point theory earlier, or the set point theory. Was it set point or setting?
Well, the set point and the settling point.
Right. Okay. So the set point theory, if everyone has this weight that they are sort of, genetically meant to be, can you override that? I mean, can you get to a stage where you lose the weight and then you hold it out for X amount of months or years and then you sort of reset to your new? It feels quite far-fetched, but
yeah, it's a good question, and I think to an extent, yes, you can, but it has to come with lifestyle and dietary changes. If I go from my 10 to 90 kilos, chances are I will feel hungrier just at my baseline than I did before. And that's where a diet which then is rich in high fiber foods, high protein foods, high bulk foods, salads, potatoes, those foods that are going to physically satiate me, but for lower calories, become really important, because then I can maintain my new level weight and I can still eat the food that's going to satisfy me because I'm taking in less energy overall.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think for people's mental health as well. And I perhaps, speaking from my own experiences, I'm perhaps fortunate in this case. I've never really had to diet. But it must be, I can imagine it must be really draining and exhausting to constantly be after that, trying to keep up or trying to maintain a diet. It's not fun, is it? There's things we want to eat, there's things we want to consume, and it can be tough not sort of winning at this weight loss thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think, we could spend hours on that. You could spend hours talking about this topic.
Yeah, we have to be careful because you come and do a talk every month at Jim's Gym. We can't cover everything in
No,
here.
that's very true. That's very true. So I'll try and keep my thoughts on this bit brief. But it is, especially if you're somebody who has got to, even the mid-20s, right? Mid-20s, late 20s, you start to ingrain some habits, some behaviors, some thought patterns. If you then got to your 50s, 60s, 70s, that's a lifetime's worth of habits and beliefs and behaviors that may need some sort of microscope pointed at them if you want to change your dietary habits. And I think one of the issues I have with call them crash diets, names diets where they go, hey, here's a plan, follow it, you're going to lose weight. One of the issues I have with them is they don't consider you as a person. And I think one of the key skills to develop if you want to try and lose body fat is mindfulness or awareness. Okay, so I guess there's two streams to that. It's what am I currently doing? Actually, what and that level comes without judgment. It's just, oh, this is what I eat for breakfast. Oh, I've had a snack now 2 hours after breakfast. Oh, actually, when in the evening, these are the sorts of foods I go for. Actually, what are you doing? And the second level to that is, well, why am I doing that? Again, it's not putting judgment on it. It's not saying, you shouldn't be doing that. You failed if you do that. You're a bad person if you do that. That's often the psychology that comes with the dieting mentality. But if you can actually be objectively aware of what you do and why you do it, then you can better understand the changes that you can make, which you're going to stick with, but that are also going to help you. And I think if you're somebody who has struggled or been on that bandwagon of diet, no diet, dissatisfaction with self or diet or whatever, for a long period of time, it's often that awareness piece is what's lacking.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah, it is a conversation that's, and actually I'm looking at my notes here today and I've got another massive section. We're not going to have time to do it today. So we're either going to have to do another, I know you've spoken about it in the Jim's Gym sessions, but we'll have to either do another podcast or something at a different stage. But there's so much to go into. And now with like tech, personalized nutrition, we've got all the wearable glucose monitors, all this sort of stuff. It's a never evolving industry. What should we say? Okay. Anyway, right. Fascinating. We can go on and on and on. Let's talk about. Let's lift this up a little bit. Right. What? Super simple one. 5 foods that everyone perhaps should try and incorporate into their daily diet.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one that's always go to for me, dark berries, red and dark berries. I think most people, provided you can tolerate them, try and get this into your diet on a regular basis. Dark leafy greens. So again, that could be your broccolis, although you don't tend to eat the leafy bits of broccolis, but they count as leafy green. Spinach, kale, something like that every day. Again, they're just an absolute nutrient powerhouse. I would say, again, provided you can tolerate them, dairy and or eggs. Okay.
And or eggs.
Yeah. So you can have them, dairy and eggs in the same day. Of course you can. But again, maybe for people who have a lower appetite, it's also fine to alternate between the two, and they both provide loads of additional nutrients that go with them. What we're on now, 3, isn't it? Definitely, I've said dark berries, but I think other fruits as well, like just as a category, those other fruits would come into that number 4. And then I would say either nuts and seeds or pulses, so beans and legumes on a daily basis.
All right. Okay. The 5. Nice. Okay. Well, I think we do quite a good job of those. I think in our household, I think there or thereabouts. Okay, very good. And then the last, so just to wrap, we're going to wrap it up pretty quickly. A couple of myths. You can sort of keep these short and sharp because, again, then, we can probably just get a podcast on each one of these, to be honest. Superfoods, what we're saying about superfoods, there's loads of hype around stuff that, they're super duper.
Again, very much in marketing label. I've bought into them myself. So when chia seeds first hit the markets, I think it was Christopher McDougall's Born to Run. I'd read about this magic chia drink you drank in the Andes, and then they're everywhere. And purple sweet potatoes is going to be the next one. You've heard it here.
Oh right, okay. Look out for that. Brilliant.
Yeah, watch out for that.
Save your pennies because they're quite expensive. What about goji berries was one that I remember sort of being quite. But all of these things, they are good for us, right? I mean,
they're good for you. Don't get me wrong. They've got the nutrients. They are, in some situations, in some cases, they may be a particularly good source of a certain nutrient, but it doesn't mean that you need them in your diet all the time to get the nutrient that they're high in.
Nice. Okay. Right. Last two things.
Go for it.
Your guilty pleasure as a dietitian, what do you go to?
Oh, that's a good question there, James. Good question. Guilty pleasure. I love food, and I think that's just summed me up as I've, come into adulthood and beyond. And I love trying new foods. So be that a new flavor of a chocolate biscuit, or be it something new on the menu, that's what I get drawn towards.
Yeah, you went chocolate biscuit first, okay?
Yeah.
And last but not least, is inspiring movement. Is kind of like inspiring change today, because it's not movement so much. I suppose it is involved, but inspiring change today. If actionable. I always end these podcasts with like one piece of like actionable advice that you could perhaps give the listeners that they can kind of go and think about and take away with them today to add a little bit of value to their lives and this podcast, I suppose.
Yes. No, I think we covered it in the last session for the gym community. But something I'm particularly enjoying at the moment is adding cacao to my diet. So the point of a unsweetened cocoa drink, or a cacao powder if you want to mix it in with your yogurt, your cereal, etc. Again, the health benefits of that, I think, are quite broad and quite well established now. It tastes good, and from a drink perspective, it makes a nice alternative to tea and coffee if you do want to have a slight like lower caffeine intake later on in the day.
Okay, all right, very good, excellent. Cacao, everybody. All right. Ian, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. For everyone listening, Ian comes and talks to the community, the Jim's Gym members every fourth Thursday of the month at 1:30 for half an hour to talk about everything that he knows about diet and food and things like that. So nutrition, which is great. And so the next one is in a few weeks' time. Other than that, I think probably we'll have to have, if you've got the time, another podcast at some point in the future. Like I say, Finder was one I wanted to tick off today, which didn't get around to as well, because that's something I'm trying to spend more time focusing on, more fiber. But yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Ian. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Have a good rest of the day.
And you, cheers.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with our next incredible guest. In the meantime, don't forget to check out Jim's Gym at www.jimsgym.fitness, where you will find access or get access to 15 live classes every week. It's a fantastic place to get started with your fitness, especially for people who aren't all that keen on joining a traditional gym. Jim's Gym, and get fit from home. I'll see you next week.